Now, many of you know I'm taking an evolutionary biology class right now. I'm a biotech major, and I've decided to take an evolutionary biology class as an elective. And of course, many of you will know that the kind of twist to that is I'm actually a young Earth creationist. And there's thousands of people in the scientific community who are young Earth creationists, so it might be unusual, it might be a little rare, but it's something that happens. And we actually think that we have a better model. Now, a lot of people will look at that and say, well, then how do you explain pseudogenes? Now, for those of you who don't know, pseudogenes are pieces of DNA that we find in the human cell, and they're very similar to pieces of DNA that code for a protein. Now, proteins do most of the jobs in our body, or to be more specific, proteins do most of the jobs in our cells. Now, so you have a piece of DNA, and you'll have a gene, and a gene will code for a protein. Now, what's interesting about pseudogenes is that they will code, they'll be very similar to pieces of DNA that code for a protein, but when the cellular machinery comes along and takes the genetic code of the pseudogene and transcribes it, it ends up getting mRNA, but that mRNA never goes on and turns into proteins. Now, a lot of people look at this and they're like, well, you made the message, so that's kind of like taking a message from a computer, writing it down on a piece of paper, and then sending it off somewhere, and then it never actually getting there. And a lot of people have said, well, then how can this have a function? The logic has been, since that we don't know the function of pseudogenes, they must have no function at all. And if they don't have any function, then that must be evidence for evolution, because there's no reason why any intelligent designer or a creator god would put all these random pieces of DNA into our cells that have no function. Now, here's the twist to that. There's a major problem to this logic. Just because you don't know the function of something doesn't mean that it doesn't have a function. And of course, evolutionists historically have made this mistake many times. During the Scopes trial, they said that there are no less than 180 vestigial organs in our body, which were basically useless leftovers of evolution. Now the number of vestigial organs in the human body is 0. We know the function of the tailbone, we know the function of the appendix, we know the function of the tonsils, we know the function of all these supposed vestigial organs. And of course, evolutionists made this mistake again with DNA. It turned out that only a small percentage of our DNA actually coded for proteins. And they said, well, the rest of the DNA is just junk then. Since we don't know what it does, since we don't know the function, it must not have a function. And if it doesn't have a function, then it is evidence for evolution. Now, of course, this is not logical, because not knowing the function, like I said, doesn't mean that it doesn't have a function. Now, historically, how did scientists who are creationists react to this, as well as scientists who were intelligent design proponents? Interestingly, scientists in both groups predicted that we would find the function of junk DNA. It would turn out that these large regions of DNA that were supposedly useless leftovers from evolution would actually turn out to have some important functions. And this includes pseudogenes. And interestingly, they were right. So it actually turns out that pseudogenes have a lot of regulatory function. They regulate other parts of the DNA. So you'll have a pseudogene, and the cellular machinery will come along, make an mRNA, and this gene product, this mRNA, will help the rest of the DNA to figure out what parts of the DNA should be turned on and off, how much of this protein should be made, or how little should be made. Things like this. So it helps turn other parts of the DNA on and off at the right time, tell it how much should be made and when. For example, pseudogenes have an important role during the inflammation process, and I'll post an article for that. So, take-home message for this. What would be the take-home message? Well, a lot of people have said, well, pseudogenes have no function. And it turns out science actually disproved that. In fact, scientists who are creationists and scientists who are intelligent design advocates really encouraged the study of junk DNA and things that were thought to be useless leftovers of evolution. And their predictions were vindicated. So this is kind of twofold. It turns out pseudogenes are not evidence for evolution, because they actually do have a function. At least they're not evidence for evolution in this sense. You can't say, well, pseudogenes have no function, and therefore they are evidence for evolution. Interestingly, the textbook we're using in my evolutionary biology class still makes this mistake. It still claims that pseudogenes don't have a function. Now, I will post some journal articles from recent research that has been done that shows that pseudogenes do have a function. That way I'm not getting 10,000 complaints that all my sources are creationist sources. I'll be posting journal articles from top scientific journals. I found an article from Cell, for example, that I'll be posting in the description box. Also, it turns out that, hey, like I said, creationists made a prediction based on their model, and the prediction turned out to be accurate. One of the big criticisms against creation is that, well, creation doesn't make any predictions. And then, of course, the same people who will say this will then say, well, the predictions of creation are wrong. And, of course, you can't have it both ways. Either it makes predictions and they fail, or it makes predictions or it doesn't make predictions at all. But the reality is, the creation model makes predictions, makes good predictions, and they turn out to be right. And of course, in this particular case, the intelligent design model made similar predictions. So this idea that these two models don't make predictions doesn't really hold true in light of the facts. So anyway, check out these articles. Check out my website, greenslug.com, and remember, slug is spelled with 2 G's. And while you're at it, check out my new website, blueslug.com, which is a science search engine designed for people who are majors in the field of biotechnology, biology, biochemistry, cell biology, or just general chemistry, those types of fields. And it's also a search engine. There's also a search engine on Blue Slug for people who are professional scientists, biochemists, cell biologists, etc. Check those out. I'll put links in the description box. And I hope y'all have a good day. Enjoy the rest of my videos.